Lyon Share podcast with our host, Ed Lyon. Ed, what's going on? You're going to give us another great schooling today. I'm excited. Every time I learn so much. And we had that back and forth AI conversation last week and different type of conversation about taxes. I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to what I'm going to learn today.
I enjoyed our conversation last week on AI, and we're going to dig into a little deeper on that topic on taxes and AI. We're going to touch on it today because on this podcast coming in October, we're going to demystify the IRS. We're going to take some of the scaries out of the IRS. Work for you?
I'm ready.
All right. So here's the thing, Neil. When most people hear the letters IRS, they get that same feeling they get when their phone buzzes and the caller ID says mother-in-law. But here's the thing. The IRS isn't the villain most people think it is. It's actually one of the largest service organizations in the world. It processes about 260 million returns every year, collects over $5 trillion in taxes, and still manages to send you your refund faster than most private companies process their employees' expense reports. Today's podcast talk is called Demystifying the IRS, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to lift the curtain and look at how the agency really works, not as a faceless bureaucracy, but as a huge machine built to fund the government and, believe it or not, serve taxpayers. So, why does it matter? When you understand the IRS, you fear it less, and compliance goes up. That's good for everyone. The truth is, the IRS isn't out to get you. It's out to get it right. But it operates under more myths, rumors, and conspiracy theories than Area 55. Here's where we're headed. We'll start with a little history, how a wartime tax turned into a permanent institution. Then we'll look at how today's IRS is organized, who does what, and why. We'll take a guided tour, office by office look at the big divisions that handle everything from your 1040 to a Fortune 500 audit. Then we'll walk through a real-life scenario, what actually happens during an audit, step by step. Finally, we're going to wrap up with what all this means for you and the listeners, how to use this knowledge to reduce stress, increase confidence, and maybe even sleep a little better next April. So buckle up. By the end of this talk, you all are going to see the IRS for what it really is. Not a monster under the bed, but a very large, occasionally clumsy, but absolutely necessary roommate who keeps the light on for America. Sounds fun, right?
Absolutely.
So to understand the IRS today, you've got to go back to the beginning, and way back before there even was an income tax. In the early 1800s, the federal government paid its bills with tariffs and taxes on stuff. Things like whiskey, tobacco, and playing cards. Basically, if it was fun, they taxed it. Then came the Civil War, and wars are expensive. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln needed money fast. So Congress passed the Revenue Act of 1862, which created the Office of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, the granddaddy of today's IRS. The country got its first income tax, a few percent on the wealthy, and a new army of tax collectors to enforce it. After the war ended, America said, "Thanks, Abe, but we are done with that." The income tax was repealed, and for the next 50 years, the government went back to taxing imports, booze, and cigars. Good time. But in 1913, everything changed. Congress passed the 16th Amendment, which gave it the power to tax income directly. No middleman, no apportionment among the states. That's the foundation of our modern tax system. What started as a tax on the ultra-rich has now become a shared civic duty, or depending on your mood in April, a shared civic punishment. The agency grew right along with the country. By World War II, we needed another funding fix, and that's when the government introduced pay-as-you-go withholding. So instead of waiting for everyone to pay up at year's end, taxes came straight out of paychecks. That system worked so well, it stuck, and it's why your take-home pay still feels smaller than you remember it being. In 1953, the Bureau of Internal Revenue got a new name, the Internal Revenue Service. That wasn't just a rebrand, it was a message. The IRS wanted to shift from just being a collection bureau to being a service agency. The idea was, we're not just here to take your money, we're here to help you pay it. Then in 1998, Congress gave the IRS its biggest makeover in modern history. The IRS Restructuring and Reform Act reorganized the agency by taxpayer type instead of geography. Individuals, small businesses, corporations, and nonprofits each got their own division. It also put limits on the commissioner's term and created more oversight. Basically, Congress said, let's take this giant bureaucracy and make it a little more humane. Since then, the IRS has been trying to modernize, updating decades-old computer systems that they bought back when Lyndon Johnson was president, digitizing returns and adding tools to make life easier for taxpayers. But modernization at the IRS is like remodeling a house while you're living in it. You can't just shut down and start over. So they keep patching and improving as they go. When you step back and look at the history, though, one theme keeps repeating. It's a tug of war between enforcement and service. Every reform, every restructuring has been an attempt to balance those two missions. The IRS's job is to collect the money that runs the country, but it has to do it in a way that feels fair, efficient, and human. And that's no easy task. So when people joke about the IRS being a dinosaur, remember, it's an ancient creature that survived wars, depressions, revolutions in technology, and now AI. It's not always graceful, but it's still walking tall.
All right.
And we'll see. I'll come back in 3 years and redo this presentation, and we'll see how AI has changed all of that. So
No, I'll be a half robot, half human in 3 years.
that's faster than hopefully I will. Depends on what color pill we take, right? So now that we've covered where the IRS comes from, let's talk about what it looks like today. Because, believe it or not, there is a method to this bureaucratic madness. Most people imagine the IRS as one giant cube farm filled with people whose only job is to make your life miserable. In reality, it's more like a big company out of a Dilbert cartoon, with departments, leadership, and specialized teams, each focused on a different type of taxpayer. At the very top, you've got the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, basically the IRS's CEO. The commissioner is appointed by the president and serves a 5-year term, which means just about every administration gets at least one shot to say, let's fix this thing. The commissioner sets the tones, the policies, and the priorities for the whole agency. Below the commissioner are 2 deputy commissioners. There's one for services and enforcement and one for operation support. If that sounds corporate, that's because it is. Think of services and enforcement as the front of the house, all the people dealing directly with the taxpayers. And operations support is the back of the house. That's the folks keeping the lights on, the computers running, and the paychecks processed. Next, there's the chief counsel, who's basically the IRS's in-house law firm. They're the ones making sure the agency interprets the law correctly, or if you're on the receiving end, the ones you don't want to see copied on your audit notice. You've also got the Taxpayer Advocate Service, which acts as the IRS's conscience. That's the internal watchdog that helps taxpayers when the system fails. They report directly to Congress, so when the IRS drops the ball, these are the people who can call it out publicly. And then finally, there's the Office of Appeals, an independent branch that helps taxpayers resolve disputes without going to court. About 70% of cases that reach appeals get settled, which is a polite way of saying you can work this out without bringing your lawyer. Below all that leadership, the IRS is divided into 4 main business lines, and these are the ones that actually touch taxpayers day to day. First, wages and investment, or W&I. They handle the returns for most Americans, employees, retirees, and families. If you earn a paycheck, file a 1040 and get a refund, these are your people. Second, small business and self-employed, or SBSE. This division works with the folks like you and me, Neil, who run side hustles, family businesses, or partnerships. Basically anyone whose tax life is too complicated for TurboTax, but not big enough to need Wall Street accountants. Third, there's large business and international, or B&I. These are the heavy hitters. Fortune 500 companies, multinationals, and the kinds of returns that come with binders full of spreadsheets and footnotes. And finally, tax-exempt and government entities, or TEGE. They handle charities, retirement plans, and local governments. Basically, if it doesn't pay tax, but still files paperwork, this is where it lands. If you picture it, the IRS looks like this. 1 commissioner at the top, 2 deputy commissioners under that, 4 big taxpayer divisions across the middle, and a few specialized offices floating nearby: counsel, appeals, taxpayer advocate, and criminal investigation. It's less like an octopus and more like a very slow-moving orchestra, a lot of sections all trying to play the same song. And despite what you may have heard on cable news or on Twitter, most IRS employees aren't even auditors. The majority are customer service representatives, IT staff, data analysts, and number crunchers. They're not chasing yacht owners. They're helping ordinary tax why their refund hasn't shown up. So when you call the IRS or get a letter, where it comes from depends on who you are. The IRS is literally structured around the kind of taxpayer you are. And the big takeaway here is that the IRS isn't one faceless entity. It's a collection of specialized departments that each play a role in keeping the country's financing running. Like it or not, this is the plumbing that makes the government work. Now, most Americans will never encounter the Criminal Investigation Unit, but that's what everyone jokes about being afraid of, so let's take a closer look. For starters, the CI unit investigates a boatload of financial crimes. They tackle money laundering, terrorist financing, identity theft, and similar offenses. Those are usually pretty complex cases, which means they crowd out a lot of the garden variety tax fraud. Criminal investigation is also one of the service's smallest offices. As of 2024, there were just 3,474 total employees, or about 3% of the entire staff. 2,290 of them were special agents. Those are the ones who carry guns, but they're the only ones in the IRS who carry guns. The rest were mostly administrators. That's not a lot of firepower, considering the IRS gets over 260 million returns per year. With that small a team, the IRS doesn't get to prosecute nearly as much as you might think. As the chart shows, they've averaged barely 2,000 criminal referrals per year over the last 5 years. The IRS doesn't actually prosecute anyone themselves. Instead, they refer cases to the Justice Department. However, nearly all of those referrals do result in filing charges. And if someone does get charged, they can safely assume their goose is cooked. The IRS wins over 90% of the cases they take to court. So, you really got to be a pretty bad guy to get prosecuted by the IRS. But if you do get prosecuted, you're toast. So, now that we know who's who inside the IRS, let's see what happens when one of those divisions actually reaches out to you, usually in the form of a letter that begins, "We found a discrepancy." In other words, an audit. Don't panic. It doesn't mean the IRS is about to seize your dog. It usually means a computer somewhere couldn't make two numbers match. So, let's meet Steve. He's a small business owner who runs a little design studio and files through his S corporation. He's successful, careful, and a little too confident in QuickBooks. One day he opens the mail and sees the words "official IRS correspondence," the taxpayer's version of a Halloween jump scare. His notice comes from the Small Business Self-Employed Division because that's the group responsible for entrepreneurs like him. The letter says the IRS computer noticed his reported income doesn't quite match the 1099s his clients sent in. Nothing huge, maybe an innocent typo, maybe he missed a form. Either way, he's now officially in audit. So, step one, the correspondence audit. The IRS starts small. Steve is asked to send documentation, bank statements, invoices, proof of deductions. In most cases, this all happens by mail or online, not in person. About 80% of audits end right there. Step two, the field audit, if needed. If the paperwork doesn't clear things up, the IRS assigns a revenue agent to meet with Sarah would meet with Steve or his accountant. This could happen at his office, his CPA's office, or sometimes virtually. The agent reviews the books, asks questions, maybe consults with the chief counsel if the issues get tricky. Depreciation, business versus personal expenses, that sort of thing. Step three, the examination report. After reviewing everything, the agent issues findings. If they agree Steve owes a little more tax, they'll propose an adjustment. Steve can say yes, sign, and move on, or he can disagree. Step four is the appeal. If Steve thinks the examiner got it wrong, he doesn't have to lawyer up right away. He can appeal to the Independent Office of Appeals, which is designed to settle disputes without going to court. The appeals officers don't report to enforcement. Their job is to reach a fair resolution. About 7 in 10 cases that go to appeals get resolved right there. The IRS likes settlements just as much as taxpayers do. Less paperwork. Neil, a couple minutes ago, we talked about how 80% of the audits get settled at the correspondence level. Then if there's disagreement, 70% of the cases get resolved in appeals. We're looking at 94% of cases resolved at this level. Step 5, the safety net. If at any point Steve gets stuck in the gears, missing paperwork, a frozen refund, a notice that makes no sense, he can call the Taxpayer Advocate Service. They have the power to cut through red tape and get a real person on the phone who can actually fix things. Step 6, tax court and beyond. If appeals doesn't work out, and remember, this is only 6% of the remaining audit cases, Steve can file a petition in U.S. Tax Court, a separate body that reviews IRS divisions. There's even a small claims division of tax court that reviews cases under $50,000. That's the end of the line before real litigation. So that's the anatomy of an audit. And notice what's missing? There's no SWAT team. There's no SUV. There's no villain twirling a mustache and a calculator. It's mostly letters, documentation, and a process designed to make sure everyone pays what they owe and not a penny more. In fact, most audits end with either a small adjustment or no change at all. The IRS isn't out to ruin Steve's life. It's out to make the numbers line up. And the more you understand how that process works, the less scary it becomes. This is important for my tax planning client. People are in pain over their taxes. But if they're more afraid of the IRS than they are in pain over their taxes, they're not going to move forward with tax planning. So I walk through this explanation to let them see what it's really like inside, not the scary stuff that they're going to see on cable news or on social media. All right, we've seen where IRS came from and what happens when it shows up in your mailbox. Let's fast forward to where it's going. Believe it or not, the IRS is slowly, painfully trying to work through the biggest glow up since they stopped accepting returns on stone tablets. For decades, the agency ran on aging mainframes and paper. I mentioned a few minutes ago, the IRS computers where they store the master tax records were commissioned when Lyndon Johnson was president. Picture a warehouse of file cabinets that could double as the final scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Then came the Taxpayer First Act in 2019 and a surge of modernization funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. Suddenly, the IRS could dream bigger and fast. So today, about 90% of returns come in electronically. Refunds that used to take weeks now hit bank accounts in days. You can check refund status, set up payment plans, or even talk to a chatbot all from your phone. The IRS has gone from paper cuts to pixels, and the agency isn't just investing in tech, they're trying to invest in trust. There's a new emphasis on taxpayer experience, actually answering phone calls, better notices, and online tools that actually work. They're even redesigning letters to look less like ransom notes and more like customer service. Now, does it always go smoothly? Of course not. This is still the government, Amazon Prime. But the mission has shifted from collect every dime to make compliance easy. The IRS knows that people are more likely to pay what they owe when they understand what they owe. That's not just enforcement, that's psychology. And here's the kicker. For every new enforcement agent you've heard about on cable news, the IRS is hiring even more IT specialists, data scientists, and customer service reps. They're not all coming from your receipts. Some of them are coming to fix your login. In short, the IRS is trying to reinvent itself from a feared enforcer into a functional, tech-driven service agent. It's a work in progress, but for the first time in a long time, it's progress that tax professionals like me can actually see. So if the history of the IRS is a story about survival, its future is about service. Now, let's talk about the most recent drama because every living organism has a fight or two in its later chapters. The IRS's latest one is playing out right now. When Trump retook the White House, one of his signature moves was to slash the size and influence of government agencies. The IRS, being the least popular, was inevitably a target. Trump froze hiring, ordered cuts in staff and operations, and signaled his intention to reduce the IRS budget by 20% or more to eliminate what he called wasteful contracts and bloated bureaucracy. Meanwhile, the IRS was already riding a wave of funding from the Biden administration, especially through Inflation Reduction Act allocations aimed at modernizing and taxpayer services. But by mid-2024, the IRS had reportedly spent only a small portion of its modernization and enforcement funds, suggesting bottlenecks, internal inertia, or just plain difficulty scaling fast enough. So you have a paradox here, a huge potential influx of resources, but systemic constraints and now top-down cuts threatening to cripple the agency's ability to take advantage of those resources. In that setting, a new actor enters the scene, DOGE, an acronym for the Department of Government Efficiency. The story and lawsuits allege that DOGE was granted deep and sensitive access into IRS systems, including taxpayer databases, raising alarms among privacy, oversight, and legal circles. Critics warn the risks of such access are enormous. Taxpayer confidentiality is a foundational principle of IRS law, and giving a semi-outside body access to internal workflows could invite political meddling, data leaks, or misuse of enforcement decisions. We all remember the kids running DOGE, a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old tech nerds running around with your taxpayer data in their hands. Meanwhile, the human toll is real. Reports say about 11% of the IRS workforce accepted buy-offs or were laid off, and projected cuts could reach 18% across the agency. There are also signs that the Taxpayer Advocate Service, that internal safety net, is facing staff cuts. Over 20% of its employees might be trimmed, limiting the ability to act as the voice of reason for taxpayers stuck in bureaucratic ruts. On the policy side, the Trump administration has announced plans to end the IRS Direct File program, the pilot that let taxpayers file directly through the IRS for free rather than paying TurboTax. Bottom line here, Neil, the IRS under Trump is walking a tightrope. It's shrinking staff even as its mandate grows, especially with digital assets like crypto. It's under pressure from the White House's efficiency drive while grappling with internal modernization and privacy risk. DOGE saga illustrates that tension. Who controls access? Who makes enforcement decisions? And how much should political actors meddle in the agency's core mission? The story here is that the IRS isn't static or sacred. It's a living institution buffeted by politics, personnel, and the shifting frontier of technology. And right now, that frontier includes DOGE. So we've covered a lot of questions here. We've started with myths, that the idea that the IRS is some dark, windowless fortress where fun goes to die. Okay, that one might be true. Then we traced how it began, born in wartime, reshaped in reform, and constantly trying to balance two impossible jobs, being both a collector and customer service rep for 330 million people. We saw the structure, not as one big scary blob, but as a collection of divisions that mirror the taxpayers they serve. We walked through Steve's audit step by step and discovered most of the process is just paperwork, panic. And finally, we looked at where the IRS is heading, a slow but steady march towards modernization with an eye on making life easier for taxpayers. The real message is this: understanding replaces fear. When you know how the system works, you stop seeing the IRS as a threat and start seeing it as part of the machinery that keeps our country running. Now, that doesn't mean you have to like paying taxes. Nobody does. But it helps to remember that the same agency that sends you that April 15th reminder also funds the roads, the military, Social Security checks, national parks, and the IRS's agents' own salaries, which, if nothing else, is a beautiful kind of irony. So next time you get a letter from the IRS, don't reach for the tinfoil hat. Reach for understanding, because once you demystify it, you realize the IRS isn't some faceless monster. It's just a very large, very human system trying in its own bureaucratic way to make the numbers work. Now, what questions do you have? Anything that you always wanted to ask about the IRS, but you were afraid might trigger an audit?
Is those questions for me? Are these questions for me?
What questions do you have?
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so we definitely want people to comment based on these questions. I think that what we're seeing is the IRS is not efficient anymore. We are going to launch one of the podcasts that we've already batched with your experts that talked about AI and how AI is now part of the auditing process, or at least looking at the return the first time. It's almost like throwing into a TurboTax, but have a super AI, hopefully, stating, oh, okay, this does not look right. We're just going to go send it back. In a way, almost like a report card without any look at things. Like sometimes we make a mistake on Facebook, that we post something on Facebook that isn't wrong, but Facebook thought it was wrong, so they banned it. So we had to go through the appeal process, or YouTube.
Or even worse, the government told Facebook to ban it. That's a whole different series of
Or YouTube, where you posted something that says misinformation, it's gone. You could go back and say that's not true. You could, but this is what I'm hearing. So how have you been hearing things? I know that I already heard some things that are not very good with the auditing process right now, eliminating human beings in the auditing game, or at least in the reviewing game.
Yeah.
What's happening? And is it that big a threat if you get a return back now with this AI programs kind of flagging things?
Yeah. So is it a threat? It depends on how you define a threat. If you've been cheating on your taxes and AI does a better job of catching it, that is a threat. But that's your responsibility for cheating on your taxes. If you haven't been cheating on your taxes, if you're filing your best return in good faith and AI flags something, yeah, it puts you in a funnel. And the funnel is supposed to work a certain way. AI is supposed to help the IRS be more efficient. And if that's the case, that's actually a good thing. It means that your CPA can negotiate with the IRS, answer their questions, and it's less a scary experience for you. That's great in theory, but does it work in practice? Let's see. Right now, the IRS is on a mission. They're moving away from enforcement by manpower towards enforcement by technology. So it's important that they have the funding to afford the technology. The problem is politically, they're not getting the funding they need. And can you take out enforcement by people before enforcement by technology is in place? Or are you creating a big gap? And I think that's what most IRS practitioners are going to tell you is happening right now. They've taken budget dollars away from the IRS. They've taken budget dollars away from auditor salaries. There are fewer auditors to do the work. And as Ashley and Mary said, when we taped a couple of weeks ago now, the easiest thing for the IRS to do is just say no. In which case you're going to have to go to appeals, or you're going to have to go to the taxpayer advocate, or in a worst case scenario, you're going to have to go to tax court to resolve these issues. Technology with the IRS is like technology anywhere else. As long as it works, it's great. And I think every American should want the technology to work because it's less expensive to enforce the tax code by technology than it is to enforce it by people. But if the technology doesn't work, it creates monstrous problems for people who get stuck in that fund.
All right, that's a great answer to the question, because that's what I was thinking. Also, I'm seeing a lot of times IRS would enforce things by taking the next level, where we're going to threaten you in certain ways. Now they're just sending it to collection agencies. What does that change? Because we all know a collection agency really doesn't do much anymore. I saw it happen to a few people I know. Is that something new that the IRS is doing now, where they're, instead of trying to enforce it?
Outsourcing collections to collection agencies and paying them a piece of the take. It's a way that they can offload that responsibility. So I mentioned in the presentation that at a certain point in an audit, a revenue agent is assigned to the case. A revenue agent is an auditor. A revenue officer is a collections agent, somebody who's working for a collections agency. And the IRS is the biggest collections agency in the country. It's Uncle Sam's collection agency. Again, it's a matter of budgetary issues. If you owe the IRS money, you're going to get notices from ACS. That's the Automated Collection Service. You're not going to get assigned a revenue officer until your case is large enough to justify putting a human being there.
So now, what would that case be?
So we don't, it depends on different IRS audit offices. So those numbers are going to be different. But at one point a few years ago, the Wall Street Journal reported that if you're in the DOGE agency, you will not have a revenue officer assigned to your case until you owe the IRS $1 million. And I want to do my Dr. Evil, $1 million, right? There are not a whole lot of people who owe the IRS $1 million. So if you owe the IRS, say, $300,000, that's going to sound like a crushing debt. If you come home and tell your spouse that you owe the IRS $300,000, there's a good chance you're going to have to start paying a divorce attorney too, right? That's a soul-crushing amount of money. But the IRS is just going to send you the automated collection letters. They may slap a lien on your house, slap a levy on your paycheck, but that's as far as it's going to go. And most people don't understand that after 10 years, all IRS debts get wiped off the books. So if you reported a tax in 2015 for, say, $100,000 and you just never paid it, and it accrued interest and penalties, and the IRS sent you letters, at the end of this year, the IRS is going to wipe out that debt. It's going to mark it as paid.
So why don't they chase this? It depends on the office.
It depends on the office.
But what if they're outsourcing into collections? It's as bad as the hospitals.
And the collection agencies aren't going to do any better job collecting the IRS.
No, they're not, because there's no threat unless it goes on a credit report, and the credit reporting agencies are not really reporting collections anymore.
They're not reporting collections anymore. Tax debt doesn't get reported on credit agencies. You can owe the IRS $100,000 and go out and lease a Mercedes tomorrow.
But isn't that crazy? But is this new?
Yes,
Is this new? Is this new by jumping to the collection agencies?
It's new jumping to collection agencies. It's not any crazier than it used to be, but the collection agencies don't have any more power to collect against you than the IRS did. In fact, a private collection agency is going to have less power to collect against you. It's just the government outsourcing this to private enterprise.
Wow.
They just aren't being given the money. So this is why it's so important to understand what's happening behind the scenes with the funding. The IRS started this year with about 100,000 employees. They're down to about 70,000, and we've got a government shutdown going on.
Yeah, what about refunds? That's going to stop, right? That's going to be the biggest thing. If the government continues to shut down and stay shut down, let's just say by close to April. I'm being crazy if that's happening. I don't even know what the country would look like then. But let's just say people wanted early refunds. Those are shot, right? Getting an early refund now.
So I couldn't tell you what the schedule is going to be with refunds. Many of the IRS employees are considered essential employees. So if the shutdown continues into next week, we're probably going to see about 45,000 layoffs, but there will still be people running the IRS. It's like air traffic controllers are considered essential employees, but the control tower in Burbank was closed yesterday. The control tower in Nashville was closed because nobody showed up to run the airplanes. My own suspicion is that when people discover that they can't fly, that's going to end the government shutdown pretty quickly. And air traffic control, if that's getting snarled, I don't see the government being shut down until April.
I got it. But what I'm saying is that the tax, especially if we start seeing cutting in more government, is there a chance your refund isn't going to come as quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Your refund won't come as quickly, or if you've got something tied up in an audit, or if it's just a paperwork dispute. I talked with a client yesterday who bought an electric car, and the IRS denied the $5,000 credit for the electric car. And I said, look, they're half-heartedly hoping that you're just going to say it's not worth the fight with the bureaucracy for $5,000. And he said, I understand that completely, but it is worth it for the $5,000 for me to reach out to the taxpayer and service and get it done. The IRS is trying to be a service organization. That's what the presentation was about. The IRS is not out to get you. They're trying to be a service organization. The problem is right now in October of 2025, they don't have the money for those kinder, gentler goals.
That's why the importance of hiring someone like Ed is that Ed will create a plan for you, make sure you save taxes, don't have to pay the IRS, and just don't be afraid of the boogeyman. That's pretty much what the lesson is.
You've just reduced today's podcast to one sentence. Don't be afraid of the boogeyman. The IRS is not the boogeyman. They are the collection agency.
I wish I knew this a long time ago, but God.
Yeah, they're the collection agency for the United States government. And the people who work for the IRS are not bad guys. They are government bureaucrats. If they're going to get laid off next week, they're going to be worried about making their mortgage payments and making their kids' tuition payments and all of the other stuff that people worry about when their income is cut off. They're not bad guys. A data scientist at the IRS is just trying to make the system more efficient so there's less friction from the money getting from you to the IRS.
Will there ever not be an IRS?
Not if we keep a similar tax system to what we have. People would love to eliminate the IRS, but the government needs money to run, and somebody's got to collect that money. Now, there could be an easier way to collect that money, let's say we moved away from the income tax and people didn't need to file income tax returns. Let's say we moved to a national sales tax. Then the tax would be collected at the cash register. You wouldn't need to file returns. You wouldn't need audits. Now, there would still need to be a smaller IRS because a lot of people would say, hey, wait a minute, there's a 27% sales tax on my Porsche. I don't want to send $27,000 to the federal government. So there'd be black markets, there'd be under the table sales, things like that. The government would still need an IRS to go after that. But most Americans wouldn't be involved with the IRS the way they are. We define our life by our relationships, by our spouses, by our children, by our friends, by our employers and our coworkers. Everybody in America has a relationship with the IRS. And most Americans think it's a pretty dysfunctional relationship. The whole story that I went through in the presentation is a 100-year history of the IRS trying to make that relationship less dysfunctional. But the IRS needs money to make it work, and they're not getting the money they need right now. That's the problem.
Some interesting stuff today. I'm glad I was able to ask some questions because I never get that opportunity. I think that we just have figured it out. Best people can contact you, Ed, and reach out to you if they definitely want to learn more about you. And also, please share and subscribe. You're not going to get a lot of these kind of information from other people. We're giving you real inside sources. Don't be afraid of the boogeyman.
Don't be afraid of the boogeyman.
Chokeslam the IRS by contacting Ed today. Appreciate it. That was the special simulcast of the Neil Haley Show and the Lyon Share podcast, guys. Take care.